For more than 7 decades of reign, Elizabeth II was always seen as a symbol of restraint and absolute discipline. She rarely showed personal emotions in public. She also almost never made personal statements about affection, favoritism, or her own judgments toward members of the family. But when she passed away in September 2022 at Balmoral Castle, a small detail in the arrangements after her death began to draw attention among many people inside the royal family. According to sources familiar with royal property matters, records related to the Queen Private will mention a special gift. It was not intended for the heir to the throne, Charles III. It was also not intended for the new Queen Camilla. Instead, the gift was given to a young and rather quiet member of the family. That person was Lady Louise Windsor. When the Queen died, Louise had just turned 18. The gift was not a piece of jewelry or a small keepsake. It was the right to use a cottage located within an estate of more than 50,000 acres at Balmoral, the place the Queen always regarded as her true home. For many royal watchers, this decision immediately raised a series of questions. Why was a property so closely connected to the Queen given to Louise? Why did figures with higher status in the royal family seem to be completely outside this story? And why was Prince William believed to support this decision, while Camilla appeared to have almost no role in the arrangement? Some observers believe that Louise held a special place in the Queen heart because she continued the passion for carriage driving that Prince Philip once loved. But was that the only reason? Or did this gift truly carry a deeper message about loyalty and personal values within the royal family? What message do you think the Queen was sending through this gift? Comment number 1 if you believe this was her way of choosing someone to preserve the true values of the monarchy. Or comment number 2 if you think this was simply a gesture of family affection. Do not forget to like and subscribe to follow the entire story. Now let us go deeper into the truth behind that gift. And the story must begin from the place the Queen always called home, Balmoral. To understand why the Queen gift attracted so much attention, it is first necessary to understand the special meaning of Balmoral to her. For the public, the British royal family is often associated with familiar places such as Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. But for Elizabeth II, the place where she truly felt she belonged was located hundreds of kilometers north of London. That place was Balmoral Castle. Balmoral lies in the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by forests, rivers, and wide valleys. The entire estate covers about 50,000 acres. More importantly, this property does not belong to the British state. It is the personal property of the royal family. This means that decisions related to Balmoral are not directly supervised by the government or parliament as many other royal properties are. The origin of this estate dates back to the 19th century. In 1852, Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert purchased Balmoral as a private retreat for their family. From that moment, Balmoral gradually became one of the most important places for the British royal family, not in a political sense, but in a personal one. Throughout her 70-year reign, Elizabeth II almost always returned to Balmoral every summer. There, her schedule was very different from life in London. There were no long official audiences lasting for hours. There were no strict palace rituals. Family members often wore simple clothing, drove their own cars across the large estate, walked through the forests, or took part in outdoor activities. People who worked for the royal family have often said that Balmoral was the rare place where the Queen could live something close to a normal life. She could walk for hours in the forest. She could speak comfortably with staff without complex protocol. And most importantly, it was the place where she spent the most time with her family. Because of that, Balmoral also became connected with some of the most private moments of her life. After Prince Philip passed away in 2021, several sources said the Queen spent even more time at Balmoral. Those close to her said it was the place where she could reflect on the final years of her life without pressure from the public. And it was also at Balmoral, On September 8, 2022, that Queen Elizabeth II died at the age of 96. Her passing closed one of the longest reigns in the history of Britain, but at the same time, it opened a series of questions about the personal decisions she had made in the final years of her life. One detail that drew attention was the ownership structure at Balmoral, because it is personal property. The Queen had full authority to decide how certain parts of the estate could be allocated according to her wishes. The cottages scattered across the estate have long been used as private residences for family members or trusted guests. They are completely separate from the main castle, creating a level of privacy that is almost absolute. These cottages are the quietest part of Balmoral. They are not places where official receptions take place. They are not areas where the press is allowed to approach. They are small spaces deep within the forest or near streams, where only family members and those who are trusted are allowed to visit. Therefore, when information spread that one of those cottages had been reserved for Lady Louise Windsor, many royal watchers immediately recognized the significance. This was not a ceremonial gift. It was part of the most private space the Queen had ever had. That made the situation even more intriguing when considering Louise's position within the family. She is not an heir to the throne. She is also not a figure who frequently appears before the public. However, according to many sources inside the royal household, Louise was one of the grandchildren for whom the Queen held particular affection in the final years of her life. The decision connected to Balmoral, therefore, was not simply a story about property. It also reflected the way the Queen viewed personal values within her family. And it is precisely this point that led many people to raise a larger question. Why? Among many possible choices, did the Queen give that special gift to Louise? What made her the person trusted with one of the most private spaces at Balmoral? And could this decision be connected to the quiet changes that have been unfolding inside the royal family? To understand that, we must look more closely at the person the Queen chose. A quiet granddaughter who seems to hold a very special place within the family, Lady Louise Windsor. And the real question is this: why her? To understand why the gift at Balmoral was given to Lady Louise Windsor, it is necessary to look more closely at her unusual but often overlooked position within the royal family. While many younger members of the royal family regularly appear in the media, Louise has remained almost entirely outside the spotlight. That silence has led many observers to begin questioning what her real role might have been during the final years of the Queen life. Lady Louise Windsor was born in 2003. She is the eldest daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie. When she was born, Louise arrived prematurely and weighed only about 4 pounds. She also experienced vision problems very early in life and later underwent surgery to correct a condition affecting her eyes when she was still a child. These early challenges led her parents to choose a style of upbringing quite different from that followed by many other branches of the royal family. The family of Edward and Sophie has long been seen as one of the most private households within the British royal family. They rarely become the center of media controversies. Their children were also raised in a relatively normal environment compared with typical royal standards. Several sources say that Edward and Sophie deliberately kept distance from media attention, especially during the years when Louise was still young. One notable detail is that although Louise is a granddaughter of Elizabeth II, and according to royal rules, had the right to use the title of princess with the style of HRH, her family chose not to use that title. This decision was made when Louise was still a child. Instead of being called Princess Louise, she became known publicly as Lady Louise Windsor. This choice created a very different path for her. Louise is not a working royal in the traditional sense. She was also not prepared to become a central figure in official royal duties. Instead, she grew up living a relatively private life. When the time came for university, Louise continued along a fairly ordinary path. She enrolled at the University of St. Andrews, one of the most respected universities in Scotland. This is also the same university Prince William attended many years earlier. However, Unlike William, Louise did not become the focus of media attention when she began her student life. Several students at the university have said that she tried to maintain a simple lifestyle, moving around campus on her own and taking part in activities like other students. This quiet lifestyle has made Louise's public image rather faint in the eyes of many people. In popularity rankings of royal figures, her name rarely appears. Yet for those who closely observe the internal dynamics of the royal family, Louise has a special connection with one very important figure. That person is Prince Philip. Philip was famous for his passion for carriage driving, a sport that demands patience, technical skill, and extremely precise control. After he passed away in 2021, many people believed this tradition within the family might gradually fade away. But Louise became the one who continued that passion. During the memorial events for Philip, the image of Louise personally driving a carriage made a strong impression on royal watchers, not because it was dramatic, but because the moment felt natural and sincere. She did not try to turn it into a performance for the media. It was simply the way she continued a hobby that had been passed down from her grandfather. Some observers believe that moment was when the Queen began paying particular attention to Louise. After Philip died, several people close to the Queen said she appreciated gestures that showed loyalty to family values more than public popularity. The contrast between Louise and several other members of the family therefore became quite clear. In recent years, Prince Harry became one of the most controversial figures in the royal family after publishing his memoir Spare. The book quickly sold millions of copies around the world and triggered numerous debates about private matters inside the royal household. Meanwhile, Louise has almost never made any public statements about her family. She has not taken part in controversial interviews. She has also not built a personal image based on behind-the-scenes stories about royal life. Some media analysts believe this difference reflects two completely opposite approaches to royal fame. One approach turns personal stories into public content. The other approach remains silent and continues family traditions in a quieter way. Seen from that perspective, the image of Louise driving a carriage after Philip's death carries strong symbolic meaning. While some other members of the family attract global attention through books, documentaries, or interviews, Louise appeared in an activity closely connected with one of the oldest traditions of the royal family. For someone who valued duty and tradition as deeply as Queen Elizabeth II, small details like this could carry far greater meaning than the public might realize. Royal historians often repeat that the Queen always respected discretion and loyalty above all. If that is true, then Louise receiving a portion of private space at Balmoral may not have been a random decision. It may reflect the way the Queen chose someone she believed would respect the personal values of the family. However, a decision like this within the royal family rarely involves only one person, especially when it concerns Balmoral, one of the most important personal properties of the family. Several sources suggest that for such an arrangement to become reality after the Queen's death, it would require agreement from powerful figures of the next royal generation. And here a very important name appears: Prince William. According to several royal observers, William holds the greatest influence in maintaining the personal decisions the Queen made during the final years of her life. If that is correct, then his support may have been the key factor that allowed the gift for Louise to become reality. And that leads to the next question. Why would William support this decision? And how significant is his role in the Balmoral story? After Elizabeth II passed away on September 8, 2022, at Balmoral Castle, all of her personal assets, according to royal convention, were transferred to the heir to the throne. That person was Charles III. In the legal structure of the British monarchy, many properties are passed down in this way in order to avoid inheritance tax obligations and to ensure the continuity of royal assets. This means that important personal estates, including Balmoral, legally came under the control of Charles after he became king. However, the story does not end there. In reality, The management of large estates such as Balmoral often involves the next generation of the royal family, and the person with the most important role in this period is Prince William, as the future heir to the throne. William does not simply observe the transfer of property. He is also seen as the person who will hold long-term responsibility for estates such as Balmoral when the next reign begins. For that reason, when information about a cottage at Balmoral being reserved for Lady Louise Windsor began to appear in internal discussions, many observers believed that William's support played an important role. If Charles holds direct ownership, William represents the future direction of the entire royal property system. According to several sources who closely follow royal affairs, William did not oppose the decision. On the contrary, he is believed to have supported respecting the personal wishes that the Queen expressed during the final years of her life. This helped the arrangement proceed relatively smoothly. There was no public dispute. There were no visible signs of disagreement inside the family. For many royal analysts, this approach reflects the leadership style that William has gradually begun to show. Unlike previous generations, he often emphasizes maintaining a monarchy that is smaller, less controversial, and focused on members who are truly committed to public duty. William's family background may partly explain this approach. He grew up during a period when the royal family experienced many upheavals. The marriage between Charles III and Diana collapsed under the attention of global media. The death of Diana in 1997, at the age of 36, left a deep mark on the psychology of William and his younger brother. In the years that followed, the royal family continued to face other controversies. Issues connected to Prince Andrew caused serious damage to the public image of the family. More recently, the decision of Prince Harry to step away from the role of working royal, together with interviews and the memoir Spare, reignited debates about unity inside the monarchy. For William, these events were not simply headlines in newspapers. They were personal experiences that lasted for many years. Many observers believe that these upheavals made him increasingly cautious when deciding who would play important roles in the future of the royal family. Seen from this perspective, William's support for giving a portion of private space at Balmoral to Louise may carry broader meaning. Louise is not a figure who seeks attention. She does not appear in media debates. She also does not build her personal reputation on private stories about the family. Instead, she is often described as quiet, reserved, and distant from public attention. During the rare occasions when she appears with the family, Louise often takes part in traditional activities such as carriage driving, a hobby once closely associated with Prince Philip. For those who wish to build a more stable image for the monarchy, such characteristics are considered very suitable. Some analysts believe that William is gradually shaping a group of members he trusts to represent the royal family for decades to come. If that is true, then ensuring that Louise can continue maintaining her connection with Balmoral may be seen as a symbolic step. It sends the message that members who preserve tradition and stay away from controversy are still highly valued within the royal system. Of course, it must be emphasized that most decisions related to royal property remain private. Specific details are rarely made fully public. However, the way sources and analysts discuss William's role suggests that he is increasingly viewed as the person shaping the future direction of the royal family. In that context, his support for a personal decision made by the Queen is not simply an act of respect toward his predecessor. It also reflects how he intends to manage the monarchy in the future. Less noise, less controversy, and a stronger focus on members he believes remain loyal to their responsibilities. Looking back at William's life, this approach is not difficult to understand. He watched the marriage of his parents collapse before the entire world. He lost his mother at the age of 15. He also witnessed his younger brother leave the royal family and become a controversial figure in international media. These experiences appear to have made William place increasing importance on internal stability. And within that picture, quiet members such as Louise may hold far greater importance than their level of public fame might suggest. However, while several people are mentioned in the Balmoral story, one figure seems almost completely absent from the entire process. A person who currently holds the title of Queen of the United Kingdom, Camilla, and the almost complete absence of her name in this story has led many observers to raise another question. Why does Camilla appear to stand outside a decision involving one of the most important properties of the royal family? To understand why Camilla's name rarely appears in the Balmoral story, it is necessary to look back at a history that stretches across several decades inside the British royal family. The relationship between Camilla and Charles III is not something new. It began in the 1970s, when both of them were still young and long before Charles married Diana. During the early period, the relationship between Charles and Camilla was not considered a suitable match for the heir to the throne. Camilla later married Andrew Parker Bowles, while Charles continued his royal path. However, according to many documents and later accounts, the bond between the two of them never completely ended. When Charles married Diana in 1981, the wedding was seen as a symbolic event for the royal family. But in the following years, the marriage gradually became strained. Personal disagreements, pressure from the media, and the reappearance of Camilla in Charles' life created one of the greatest crises for the British monarchy in the 20th century. A crucial turning point came in 1995, when Diana took part in the famous interview with the program Panorama. During that conversation, she said a sentence that later became a symbol of the tragedy of her marriage. Diana said that there were 3 people in that marriage, so it was rather crowded. That statement quickly spread around the world and reinforced the image of Camilla as a controversial figure in the eyes of the public. After Diana and Charles divorced, and especially after Diana died in 1997, the image of Camilla in British society remained highly controversial. For many years, the royal family had to carry out a very careful process in order to gradually reintroduce Camilla to the public. After Diana and Charles divorced, and especially after Diana died in 1997, the image of Camilla in British society remained highly controversial. For many years, the royal family had to carry out a very careful process in order to gradually bring Camilla back before the public. When Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, their wedding took place rather quietly compared with other major royal events. One notable detail was that Elizabeth II did not attend the civil marriage ceremony. Instead, she appeared only at the prayer service and the reception that followed. Many analysts at the time believed this arrangement reflected a balance between accepting Charles' personal choice and maintaining the image of the monarchy. In the years that followed, Camilla gradually took on more public duties and slowly built a more positive public image. However, her position within the royal family always remained a sensitive subject, especially when compared with the memory of Diana. Another turning point came at the beginning of 2022. In a message marking the 70th anniversary of her reign, Queen Elizabeth II publicly expressed for the first time her wish that Camilla would be known by the title of Queen Consort when Charles became king. This statement was widely seen as an official acceptance from the Queen after many years of public debate. However, accepting a title does not necessarily mean that every aspect within the family changes. This became noticeable when observers began to analyze the personal decisions of the Queen in the final years of her life, particularly those related to private properties such as Balmoral Castle. Balmoral has long been considered the place to which the Queen was most emotionally connected. It was where she spent much of her private time with her family. It was also where she died in 2022. For that reason, any decision involving the private parts of Balmoral is often viewed as having deep personal meaning. According to sources familiar with royal property matters, some arrangements related to the cottages on the Balmoral estate were believed to reflect the Queen's personal wishes. In those discussions, the name of Camilla was almost never mentioned. Instead, attention was directed toward other members of the family, especially Lady Louise Windsor, This has led many analysts to raise a rather sensitive question. Was there a difference between the Queen accepting Camilla as the wife of Charles and seeing Camilla as part of the most private space of her own life? Some royal historians believe the answer may lie in the way the Queen always separated public duty from personal feelings. As the head of the monarchy, she understood that supporting Camilla as queen consort was necessary to ensure stability when Charles became king. But in more personal decisions, especially those connected to places with deep emotional meaning, such as Balmoral, she may have followed her own feelings. If that is true, the difference between official title and personal feeling may explain why Camilla does not appear prominently in the Balmoral story. Camilla may be the Queen of the United Kingdom, but Balmoral represents a very private part of the life of Queen Elizabeth II. However, it must also be emphasized that most information related to the Queen will remain confidential. According to royal tradition in Britain, royal wills are often sealed for many years in order to protect the privacy of the family. This means the public only sees a very small portion of the real picture. Because of this secrecy, the story of Balmoral, Louise, and the role of Camilla continues to become a subject of discussion among royal watchers. Small details sometimes raise larger questions about how personal relationships influence decisions within the royal family. From here, another important question appears. If most information remains confidential, what do we truly know about the final arrangements of the Queen? And what do those decisions reveal about the future of the British monarchy? One reason the story about Balmoral and Lady Louise Windsor attracts so much attention is because most details connected to royal wills in Britain are always kept secret. Unlike many other public figures, the wills of senior members of the royal family are usually not publicly released. In many cases, British courts allow these documents to be sealed for very long periods in order to protect the privacy of the family. A recent example is the will of Prince Philip. After he died in 2021, a judge in London ordered that his will be sealed for 90 years. This means the public will not know the exact arrangements of Philip property until near the end of the 21st century. Similar rules have previously been applied to the wills of other members of the royal family. For that reason, the details of the will of Elizabeth II are almost certainly protected in the same way. The public cannot access the full document. What appears in the media is mainly based on indirect sources, people familiar with internal arrangements, or signs reflected through the actions of members of the family. For royal analysts, sometimes the small gestures in the final years of the Queen's life reveal more than legal documents. One detail often mentioned is the increasingly close relationship between the Queen and the family of Prince Edward and his wife Sophie. During the final period of her life, especially after Prince Philip died, Sophie was believed to be one of the people who spent the most time beside the Queen. Several royal journalists reported that Sophie frequently attended private meetings with the Queen and was even considered someone with whom the Queen felt comfortable sharing personal thoughts. This closeness was also reflected in several personal gifts that the Queen gave to Sophie. One detail often mentioned is that Sophie received certain personal pieces of jewelry from the Queen, including a brooch that the Queen had worn on many important occasions. Within royal circles, items like these often carry strong symbolic meaning because they are connected with personal memories of the owner. Seen from that perspective, Lady Louise Windsor being associated with a cottage at Balmoral Castle may also be viewed as a similar gesture. It may not be a large political or financial decision, but rather a personal choice about who would continue to remain connected with the Queen's private spaces. Some observers believe the context of that period is also very important. In 2020, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle officially stepped away from the role of working royal. This decision created a noticeable gap in the group of royal members carrying out public duties. In that situation, the family of Edward and Sophie began appearing more frequently in official activities. Both increased their participation in royal tours and public events in order to support the Queen during the final years of her reign. For royal watchers, this made the family of Edward a more important part of the working structure of the monarchy. While some other members moved away from official roles or became involved in media controversies, Edward and Sophie were often seen as figures who maintained a stable and low-profile image. When these details are viewed together, some analysts believe the broader picture becomes clearer. Sophie received personal gifts from the Queen. Louise became associated with a private space at Balmoral, and the family of Edward gradually played a larger role in official royal activities. Of course, because the Queen will remain sealed, no one outside the family can confirm the exact extent of these arrangements. However, the signs that appeared during the final years of her life suggest that the Queen seemed to place considerable trust in this branch of the family. This also reflects a broader trend in the way the monarchy is changing. Instead of relying only on a few highly famous figures, the working structure of the royal family increasingly appears to depend on members who are quiet but steady, people who do not seek media attention but are willing to carry long-term responsibilities, and this very trend has led many observers to begin asking a larger question about the future. When Charles III ascended the throne after the Queen passed away, he inherited a royal system already going through significant change. More recently, reports about the king's health have also drawn greater public attention toward the next generation of the family. In that context, even small decisions made during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II are sometimes viewed as signals about the long-term direction of the monarchy. Who is entrusted with responsibility? Who is associated with important symbols such as Balmoral? And who gradually becomes a public face representing stability within the royal family? And that leads to the final question many people are now asking. If the next era is already beginning to take shape, then where will the real power of the British monarchy lie in the future? Looking at the broader picture of the British royal family today, many observers believe the institution is entering a profound period of transition. After Elizabeth II passed away, the throne was transferred to Charles III. However, the turbulence of recent years has led many to believe that the next generation is gradually taking a central role in shaping the future of the monarchy. In recent months, the health of Charles has become a major subject of public attention after the palace confirmed that he was undergoing cancer treatment in the year 2024. Although the king continues to carry out certain official duties, many public engagements have increasingly been delegated to Prince William. In the view of many analysts, this has effectively made William the most influential figure in shaping the public image and daily operations of the royal family today. Alongside this transition, the internal structure of the royal family is also changing significantly. Several figures who once held important roles within the family are now largely absent from official duties. Prince Andrew has been almost completely removed from public responsibilities after a series of controversies. Meanwhile, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle stepped away from their roles as working royals in the year 2020 and built a new life in the United States. These developments have reduced the number of senior royals actively carrying out public duties compared with previous years. In this situation, many observers have begun asking who will become the next generation to carry much of the responsibility for representing the monarchy in the future. Within that broader picture, the name Lady Louise Windsor has begun to appear more frequently in discussions. Louise is now in her early 20s and currently studying at university. While maintaining a relatively private life compared with many other members of the family, she rarely appears in the media. Yet her personal profile includes one characteristic that many analysts consider extremely valuable for a modern monarchy: a public image almost entirely free from controversy. Louise grew up in the household of Prince Edward and Sophie, a branch of the family widely seen as one of the most stable and least controversial within the royal structure. For many years, Edward and Sophie have maintained a discreet approach, focusing on public service rather than building personal media attention. Louise appears to have inherited that same style. When this factor is combined with what is believed to be quiet support from Prince William, some observers believe Louise could eventually become a more significant figure in the future of the monarchy, not in a way that seeks public attention, but according to the model that William himself seems to favor: a slimmer monarchy, with fewer controversies, and centered on members who are widely viewed as dependable. Within that context, Louise's connection to a cottage at Balmoral Castle is sometimes interpreted as symbolic, not because of the property itself, but because Balmoral has long been regarded as the most private and personal retreat of the royal family. If Louise continues to maintain ties to this place, it may reflect the trust that the previous generation placed in her. However, Louise's future remains uncertain. She may continue along her current path, maintaining a private life while pursuing her own career outside royal duties. Or in a time when the monarchy faces a shortage of working members, she may gradually step into a more official role in the years ahead. And that is precisely what makes this story so interesting. You may be wondering which path Lady Louise Windsor will ultimately choose. Comment number 1 if you believe she will step forward and become an important part of the future royal family. Or comment number 2 if you believe she will continue to live a private life away from the spotlight. If you would like to explore more lesser-known stories from inside the British royal family, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next analysis. Thank you for watching. And as many historians often say, the real story of the British royal family rarely ends in a single chapter. The most important truths are often understood only after many years. A custom-made Balenciaga bag worth tens of thousands of dollars, carrying the personal monogram of Zara Tindall, suddenly disappeared from a luxury showroom in London. Just 48 hours later, the same bag appeared in a completely different place. In the hands of Meghan Markle in the middle of Paris Fashion Week. There was no official explanation. There was no clear statement from the brand. But from that moment on, a quiet chain reaction began spreading through both the fashion world and those who closely follow the British royal family. According to leaked information from sources familiar with the luxury retail industry, the bag was believed to have disappeared in early February 2026. This was not an ordinary display item. It was a custom design, personalized specifically for Zara Tindall, the daughter of Princess Anne. That meant the bag was almost impossible to confuse with any other item on the market. Yet only a few days later, images of Meghan Markle appearing at Paris Fashion Week with a Balenciaga bag that looked almost identical quickly spread across social media. Observant fashion followers immediately recognized the distinctive monogram detail. From that moment, questions began to emerge. Why would a bag custom-made for a member of the royal family end up in Meghan's hands? What exactly happened during that brief period between London and Paris? And more importantly, why, after the incident, several sources within the industry suggested that Meghan Markle had quietly been placed on a blacklist by certain luxury fashion houses, while the public was still trying to piece the story together. The reaction from Zara Tindall's family also drew significant attention. Princess Anne and Zara remained completely silent in front of the media. Yet that silence itself was interpreted by royal watchers as a very clear message. So was this an unbelievable coincidence? Or the beginning of a much larger scandal that both the royal family and the fashion world would rather keep out of public view? What do you think about this story? Comment number 1 if you believe Meghan created trouble for herself. Or comment number 2 if you suspect that there may be another hidden hand quietly influencing events behind the scenes. But to understand why a single bag could create such a powerful ripple effect, we need to turn back the clock to the early days of February 2026. For many years, Zara Tindall has been seen as one of the most unique figures within the British royal family, not because she holds a powerful position in the line of succession, and not because she frequently appears on the front pages of tabloids. On the contrary, it is Zara's quiet and steady presence that has earned her public respect. As the daughter of Princess Anne and the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, Zara grew up within the royal environment but chose a rather different path. She does not use a royal title in her daily life, and much of her career has been connected to professional sport. In the international equestrian world, Zara Tindall is not regarded as a notable figure simply because of her royal background. She built her reputation through her own achievements. At the London Olympic Games in 2012, Zara won a silver medal in the team eventing competition. That achievement made her one of the very few members of the royal family to stand on an Olympic podium through personal athletic merit. In the years that followed, Zara continued to maintain the image of a professional athlete while building a relatively private family life with her husband, former rugby player Mike Tindall, and their children. Because of this, in the eyes of many royal observers, Zara has almost become the symbol of what some call an anti-drama royal. She rarely appears in public controversies. Her name has hardly been associated with any major scandal for many years, even during periods when the royal family faced serious media crises. Zara maintained a clear distance from those conflicts, perhaps for that very reason. Even the smallest details of her life are usually handled with great care, especially when they involve official events. According to several sources within the luxury fashion industry, the Balenciaga bag mentioned in this story was not an ordinary accessory. It was a custom design created specifically for Zara Tindall. The bag was reportedly crafted from high-grade crocodile-embossed leather, finished by hand with refined gold-plated metal details. More importantly, the body of the bag carried Zara's personal monogram, a clear sign that it had been produced as a private custom order rather than a commercial product. According to the original plan, this bag had been prepared for an important gala event that Zara was expected to attend during the spring of 2026. That is why it was kept in a private display area of the Balenciaga showroom in London, waiting for the day it would be officially delivered. But then, just a few days before that event was supposed to take place, everything suddenly changed. The incident began with a rather vague internal notice from the Balenciaga showroom in London. According to sources familiar with luxury retail operations, the bag custom-made for Zara Tindall was confirmed to have disappeared during what was described as the logistics handling process. That was the explanation used in the initial report. There were no signs of forced entry, no security alarms had been triggered, and there was no official confirmation that the bag had been delivered to the wrong client. In the world of luxury brands, the phrase logistics error is often understood as a problem in internal transportation or inventory management. However, in this case, several details made that explanation difficult to accept. The Balenciaga bag created for Zara was not an item stored in a normal warehouse inventory. It was a custom design with a personal monogram and was kept in a specially managed section of the showroom. Items of this type are usually tracked by internal codes and rarely leave their location without formal confirmation of delivery. According to a source within the fashion retail industry in London, the disappearance of a custom item intended for a VIP client without leaving any trace is extremely rare. In many cases, major brands even maintain stricter control procedures for such items than for regular merchandise. For that reason, as soon as the bag was confirmed to be missing from the storage area, the management team reportedly began reviewing the entire process of transportation and delivery that had taken place in the preceding days. The reaction from Zara Tindall was said to be quite calm. People familiar with the family indicated that she had been informed about the issue shortly after the showroom discovered the problem. However, instead of responding publicly or creating media pressure, Zara was believed to have chosen a quiet approach. This is also the way she usually handles sensitive situations. There was no official statement. There were no complaints in the press. All communication reportedly took place through private channels between her representatives and the brand. But what made this story truly unusual was not the disappearance of the bag itself. The real shock came from what happened afterward. According to image records from Paris Fashion Week, just 48 hours after the London showroom confirmed that the bag had disappeared, Meghan Markle appeared at a fashion event in Paris, carrying a Balenciaga bag that looked almost identical. This immediately attracted attention within the industry. The period of 48 hours was even shorter than the average time required for a round trip between London and Paris when accounting for transportation, delivery procedures, and customer verification within luxury retail systems. Fashion observers quickly compared the images from Paris with the internal description of the custom bag prepared for Zara Tindall. Details such as the crocodile-embossed leather, the size of the bag body, and the decorative metal elements appeared almost identical. But the detail that drew the most attention was the personal monogram engraved on the surface of the bag. When these images began circulating within internal groups in the fashion industry, staff at the Balenciaga showroom in London reportedly recognized the issue almost immediately. And from that moment, according to several industry sources, the real nightmare had only just begun. As the images from Paris Fashion Week began appearing across media platforms and within private fashion industry groups, some employees at Balenciaga in London quickly noticed something unusual. At first, the attention came mainly from individuals familiar with the custom product created for Zara Tindall. They recognized several highly specific details: the crocodile-embossed leather, the distinctive metal lock structure, and most importantly, the placement of the personal monogram engraved on the body of the bag. According to a source familiar with the brand's internal operations, these images were forwarded quickly among management departments across the European region. In luxury fashion houses, monitoring product appearances in the media is a common process, especially when custom designs are involved. For that reason, the discovery of the bag in Paris was not a random coincidence, but rather the result of regular media monitoring procedures. What immediately drew the attention of brand executives was not only the bag itself. The person carrying the bag was also a critical factor. Meghan Markle at that time was not a brand ambassador for Balenciaga. She was also not included in the list of clients granted access to the brand's custom products. Within the system of high fashion houses, this distinction is extremely important. Personalized items are usually linked to a specific client and rarely appear in the hands of another person unless there has been a formal transfer. According to several sources in the industry, before the incident occurred, Balenciaga had held informal discussions about the possibility of future collaboration with Meghan Markle. This is quite common in the world of luxury fashion. Brands often evaluate potential partnerships with influential public figures before making an official decision. Such discussions can last for many months and are usually kept confidential. However, after the images of the bag began circulating widely, that process reportedly changed very quickly. A source within the fashion industry in Paris stated that within just 24 hours after the images were confirmed, all discussions related to Meghan Markle were completely frozen. From being a name under consideration on a list of potential partners, Meghan was reportedly removed from the evaluation process. For luxury brands, this was an unusually fast decision. Normally, changes in partnership strategy happen gradually and are rarely made within such a short period of time. But in this case, according to people familiar with the industry, the appearance of a custom product in the hands of someone who was not its owner created a reputational risk that the brand did not want to continue pursuing. Meanwhile, the reaction from Zara Tindall was completely different. There were no social media posts. No information leaked to the press from the family. Royal watchers noticed that Zara continued her normal daily activities without publicly mentioning the incident. Yet that silence attracted even more attention, because instead of creating a public dispute, Zara seemed to choose a completely different way of handling the situation, a quiet approach, but one that could create a far wider impact. After Balenciaga confirmed that the custom bag created for Zara Tindall had appeared in images from Paris Fashion Week, an internal review process was quickly activated. However, what stood out was that Zara's response followed a style very familiar to those who know her. According to a source close to the family, Zara did not apply media pressure and did not make any public statements. Instead, her representative simply contacted the brand directly and asked a rather simple question: "Where is my custom bag now?" That question forced Balenciaga to conduct a more detailed review within its system. Relevant departments began examining the entire record of shipments, delivery schedules, and product loan requests during the period before the bag disappeared. In the luxury fashion industry, it is quite common for celebrities to borrow accessories for events or photo shoots. However, such arrangements always require clear contracts and are closely monitored by the brand's public relations department. According to people familiar with the review process, Balenciaga did not find any official record showing that the bag created for Zara Tindall had been legitimately loaned out. There was also no documentation confirming that Meghan Markle was a brand ambassador or had authorization to access this custom design. Some sources in the industry believe that this detail was what caused brand managers to begin considering the possibility that the bag had been used in an unauthorized context. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's appearance with the bag continued to attract media attention. Only a few days after Paris Fashion Week, Meghan released a short teaser for a new media project titled Love with Meghan. In this promotional video, the Balenciaga bag appeared quite clearly in several frames. For many fashion followers, it looked like another display of Meghan's familiar luxury lifestyle. But for those observing the situation from within Balenciaga, the repeated appearance of the bag made the story even more complicated. The contrast between the two images also began to attract attention from observers. While Meghan continued to appear in media coverage and on social platforms promoting personal content, Zara Tindall maintained her normal schedule. A few days later, she attended another gala event connected to sport and charity. The Balenciaga bag was never mentioned. There were no signs that she wanted to turn the situation into a public controversy. It was this difference in approach that many people began to notice. One side continued to appear in personal media campaigns and seemed not to address any controversy. The other side remained almost completely silent and allowed the issue to be handled through private channels. However, as the story began spreading through fashion circles and communities that closely follow the royal family, another figure was said to have started paying attention to the situation, and that was Princess Anne, a woman long known for her discreet style, but also for making very decisive decisions when necessary. As the story of the Balenciaga bag spread through fashion circles and royal watching communities, many observers believed the royal family would maintain its usual silence. However, according to several sources familiar with royal circles, Princess Anne was reportedly the first person to question the wider impact of the incident. For many decades, Anne has been known as one of the most practical and disciplined members of the British royal family. She rarely participates in public media debates. Yet she holds considerable influence in decisions related to the image and responsibilities of family members. Therefore, when information about the bag and Balenciaga's reaction began circulating in private circles, Anne was said to have suggested a small internal review. According to royal sources, this review was described as a family-only review. Its goal was not to conduct a public investigation or criticize any individual, but rather to reassess how members of the royal family appear in relationships with brands and commercial partners. In recent years, as the boundaries between personal image, business activities, and royal reputation have become increasingly complex, some members of the family believed that clearer principles were necessary. One concept reportedly mentioned during this process was the idea of a non-engagement protocol. This was not an official regulation announced publicly, but rather an internal principle used to identify relationships that the royal family chooses not to engage with. In simple terms, if an individual or a project is considered likely to create controversy or negatively affect the image of the family, other members will avoid any form of collaboration or joint appearance in related activities. During this review process, several other royal figures were also mentioned as examples representing a more stable and discreet public image. Zara Tindall, who has long maintained distance from controversial commercial activities, was viewed by many observers as a clear example. Alongside her were Lady Louise Windsor and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. All three share a similar approach. They rarely appear in major commercial promotional campaigns and maintain a careful and reserved public image. According to several sources within the European fashion industry, this internal review quickly attracted the attention of major brands. Not because the royal family directly issued any request, but because luxury fashion houses closely monitor how the royal family positions its public image. In the world of high fashion, attaching a brand name to a public figure can bring enormous value, but it can also become a risk if that figure becomes involved in controversy. Within that context, several changes began to appear quite quickly. Sources familiar with the fashion industry said that within only a few weeks after the story of the bag spread widely, several potential collaboration discussions with Meghan Markle suddenly stopped. Three names frequently mentioned in internal industry conversations were Chanel, Dior, and Burberry. There were no public statements from these brands, but according to many observers, the disappearance of those negotiations was seen as a clear signal. If these reports are accurate, then, within a relatively short period, Meghan was believed to have lost at least 3 major opportunities in the luxury fashion industry. In a field where brand endorsement contracts can be worth millions of dollars and last for many years, that change was significant. What is remarkable is that this entire process happened almost completely in silence. There were no press conferences. There were no public criticisms from any member of the royal family. Yet those familiar with the way the family operates understand that sometimes silence itself carries the strongest message. And as brands began adjusting their strategies, another effect slowly started to appear. The initial decisions made by a few major fashion houses began to create a chain reaction throughout the industry. As a result, within a short period of time, what many observers described as blacklisting began spreading like a row of falling dominoes. After several collaboration discussions with Meghan Markle were reportedly halted, fashion observers began noticing another change happening quite rapidly. While the door to partnerships seemed to close for Meghan, many brands began showing greater interest in royal figures whose public image appeared stable and free from controversy. And within that list, Zara Tindall emerged as a natural choice. For luxury fashion houses, the most important factor when selecting representatives is not simply fame. What they seek is long-term reliability, a figure who can appear in public without bringing unexpected media crises. For many years, Zara Tindall has almost perfectly matched that standard. She has a clear athletic reputation, a stable family life, and a fashion style that is elegant without being excessive. According to several sources in the European fashion industry, after the controversy surrounding the Balenciaga bag began spreading, some major brands reviewed their lists of figures they wished to associate with in the future. Chanel was one of the names most frequently mentioned in internal industry discussions. Previously, there had been rumors that Meghan Markle might become a suitable figure for campaigns aimed at the North American market. However, after the series of events at the beginning of 2026, those discussions were reportedly not continued. Instead, attention began shifting toward other members of the royal family, particularly those whose public image is closely connected with tradition and stability. Zara Tindall quickly became one of the most frequently mentioned names, not because she actively sought fashion contracts, but because her image matched the way brands wished to build stories around refinement and heritage. Within a relatively short time, Zara's appearances in public also began attracting greater attention from international fashion magazines. She appeared in a major feature in Harper's Bazaar discussing the elegant style of members of the British royal family. Fashion editors emphasized that Zara represents a very different image compared with many modern celebrities. Not loud, not chasing media trends, yet maintaining steady influence over many years. Traditional events such as Royal Ascot also became moments when Zara's image received greater attention. In photographs appearing in the press, she often chose outfits with a classic style combined with refined accessories. This matched the way many luxury brands seek to connect their image with long-established values of British culture. According to several sources familiar with the fashion industry, from February to March 2026, Zara Tindall reportedly received more than 5 invitations for collaborations or event appearances from major luxury fashion houses. These invitations were not always formal advertising contracts. In many cases, they could be invitations to attend private fashion shows, collection launch events, or special media projects. However, the sudden increase in invitations over a short period clearly demonstrated the industry's growing interest in her public image. Meanwhile, the situation for Meghan Markle was described in a completely different way. Sources in the industry said that after the controversies at the beginning of 2026, many brands chose to maintain distance. There were no public announcements about ending cooperation, but there were also no new projects confirmed. In the world of high fashion, such silence is usually understood as a very clear signal. The contrast between these two trends attracted the attention of many media analysts. On one side was an image increasingly strengthened through traditional events and quiet support from brands. On the other side was an almost complete absence from major campaigns in the fashion industry. However, according to several sources familiar with people close to Meghan Markle, the story did not end there. When she realized that collaboration opportunities were gradually disappearing, Meghan was believed to have begun considering new steps to respond to the situation. And that was when the first warnings reportedly began to appear. According to several sources in the media industry, Meghan had started mentioning the possibility of stronger legal and media actions if the story continued to damage her reputation. As opportunities for collaboration in the fashion industry began to slow down, some media sources reported that Meghan Markle chose a different response. Instead of continuing to remain silent, she was said to have sent several private messages to acquaintances within the industry, suggesting that if the Balenciaga bag story continued to harm her reputation, she might reveal additional sensitive information related to connections between the royal family and the fashion world. These messages were not public statements. They appeared in the form of private letters and confidential conversations. However, in an industry where rumors travel very quickly, within a short time, many people became aware that Meghan was considering the possibility of leaking further information if necessary. Some observers believed this was an attempt to create media pressure, forcing brands and related figures to reconsider their positions. However, the response from the royal family was quite different from what many people expected. According to sources familiar with internal palace circles, those messages received almost no official response. There were no public denials. There were no lengthy explanations. Royal media advisors were believed to have chosen their familiar strategy: silence and continuation of normal duties. Some royal watchers suggested that this strategy was not surprising. Throughout the hundreds of years of the British monarchy, the royal family has faced many media crises far greater than this one. From political scandals to personal controversies involving family members, they have learned to manage pressure through patience and careful control of information. For that reason, for many people within the palace, threats of information leaks from a single individual were not considered enough to alter their strategy. Meanwhile, another detail unexpectedly drew public attention. During a conversation on the sidelines of a charitable sporting event, Zara Tindall was reportedly heard making a brief remark to a group of reporters. The sentence quickly spread across social media. Some ride horses. Some ride headlines. Although the remark did not mention anyone directly, many people believed it clearly reflected the difference between two lifestyles. Zara is known as a professional equestrian athlete. Her life is connected to competitions, sports activities, and family. Meghan Markle, by contrast, often appears in media campaigns and entertainment projects. For that reason, even a single short sentence was enough to trigger widespread speculation in the media. At the same time, according to several royal sources, Princess Anne was also believed to have sent a private personal message. It was not an official warning, but rather something closer to discreet advice. The message was described as revolving around a simple idea. Within the royal family, long-term legacy is always more important than short-term advantage. Those familiar with Anne's way of thinking believe this reflects a principle she has maintained throughout decades of public service. What was notable is that despite the reported threats of information leaks from Meghan, there were almost no signs that members of the royal family felt pressured. Some media analysts even commented that the British royal family has experienced far greater crises throughout its history, from controversies in previous centuries to events that shocked the entire world. They have repeatedly passed through difficult periods without responding directly to every criticism. For that reason, the recent warnings appeared to create little change in the way they handled the situation. The palace continued to maintain silence. Official duties of the family continued as usual, and stories within the fashion industry continued spreading in their own way. And when observers looked back at the entire chain of events from the Balenciaga bag to the reactions that followed, many began to realize that everything was gradually leading toward a rather clear conclusion. As the controversy surrounding the Balenciaga bag slowly faded from the surface of media attention, other developments began attracting the notice of observers. These events were not directly connected to the bag, but they revealed a broader picture of the positions held by the figures involved in the story. In particular, the growing contrast between the way Meghan Markle faced public pressure and the way other members of the royal family handled similar situations. During that same period, the organization Archewell, the charitable foundation associated with Meghan and Prince Harry, was reportedly facing several questions related to financial procedures and tax reporting in the United States. According to sources familiar with legal matters, such reviews are not unusual for large nonprofit organizations. However, when information about tax record examinations began appearing in the media, it contributed to increasing pressure surrounding Meghan's public image. At the same time, many observers noticed that Meghan seemed to appear less frequently at major fashion and entertainment events. There was no official announcement stating that she had been removed from any list. But in an industry that relies heavily on relationships and private invitations, prolonged absence is often interpreted as a sign of gradual isolation. Meanwhile, in Britain, the public image of several other members of the royal family was strengthening in a completely different direction. Catherine, Princess of Wales, after a period of absence due to health reasons, began returning to several important public events. One of the most widely discussed appearances was when she wore again an evening gown associated with the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II during a formal ceremony. For many royal watchers, that choice was not simply about fashion. It carried a clear symbolic meaning. The reference to the image of Queen Elizabeth was seen as a way of emphasizing the continuity of royal tradition during a time when the family is experiencing many changes. At the same time, Zara Tindall continued maintaining her familiar rhythm of life within the world of sport and charitable activity. Princess Anne also maintained her demanding schedule of hundreds of public duties each year. These three figures began to be mentioned together in many media analyses, not because they appeared as part of a coordinated strategy, but because the way they managed public pressure showed several similar qualities. According to many observers, The common thread connecting Zara, Anne, and Catherine lies in their discretion and discipline. They rarely respond directly to controversies. Instead, they focus on their work and allow their public image to be built gradually over time. This approach creates a rather clear contrast with the way Meghan Markle often appears in the media. Television projects, personal campaigns, and stories centered around her personal experiences frequently attract strong attention. But they also make her image the focus of intense debate. This difference has led many people to begin speaking about a kind of quiet alliance within the royal family. It is not a formal agreement, but rather a shared understanding about how to protect the image of the family before the public. One side emphasizes duty, discretion, and long-term legacy. The other is more closely tied to media attention and personal storytelling. And when the entire chain of events is placed together, from the Balenciaga bag to the shifts in the fashion industry and public perception, that contrast appears to become even clearer. Looking back at the entire story, many people realize that everything began with what seemed to be a very small detail. A Balenciaga bag that had been specially prepared for Zara Tindall disappeared from a showroom in London. But within a short period of time, the incident triggered a series of reactions. From a suspicion within the fashion industry, the story quickly spread into the media, influenced partnership negotiations, and eventually became a test of how the public views two very different images within the royal world. On one side stands Meghan Markle, a figure who constantly attracts the attention of international media. Her television projects, personal initiatives, and the way she tells the story of her life often create major waves of discussion. Yet that same attention sometimes forces luxury brands to carefully consider potential reputational risks. On the other side stands Zara Tindall, no royal title in her everyday life, no loud media campaigns. Most of her time is connected to sports, family life, and charitable activities. Yet it is precisely this stability and discretion that leads many brands to see her as a symbol of traditional elegance. According to what sources within the fashion industry have revealed, within about 6 weeks after the story about the bag began to spread widely, the situation changed quite clearly. Meghan Markle was reportedly close to losing most major collaboration opportunities within the world of high fashion. Meanwhile, Zara Tindall began receiving increasing invitations to appear at events and media projects organized by major fashion houses. For many observers, this shift is not simply the story of a contract or an accessory. It reflects the way the fashion industry evaluates two completely different interpretations of what royal elegance means. From a single bag to the decisions made by major brands, this story ultimately opens a larger question. What truly defines the image of a royal figure in the modern era? Is it fame and the ability to capture media attention? Or is it patience, discretion, and a long-term sense of responsibility? If you have followed this entire story to this point, let us know what you think. Press like if you believe Zara Tindall represents the royal style the public wants to see. And do not forget to subscribe to follow the Royal Insider series, where we continue to explore the lesser-known stories behind royal events. And return to the question raised at the beginning. Do you think this was a personal mistake by Meghan Markle? Or is there a larger factor behind the story? Comment number 1 if you believe Meghan created this situation herself. Or comment number 2 if you believe other forces may be quietly influencing the outcome. Because after everything, royal history often shows one very clear truth. Royalty is not defined only by blood. It is defined by what a person chooses to do when the media spotlight is gone. And this time, silence seems to have spoken louder than any public statement. Thank you for watching until the end, and we will see you again in the next video. Another royal story is waiting to be revealed. You will not want to miss it. For many decades, Buckingham Palace has been regarded as one of the most tightly controlled centers of information in the United Kingdom. Every official statement is carefully considered. Every small detail related to members of the royal family, especially the children, is protected almost absolutely. But sometimes, even that system of control cannot completely prevent unusual signs from slipping out. The story began with a series of small details that at first seemed unrelated, yet they quickly attracted the attention of royal watchers. Within a short period of time, several high-level internal meetings were scheduled with unusual urgency. Close aides to the king were called in late at night. Some planned royal engagements were quietly adjusted without any clear public explanation. According to sources who closely follow royal activity, King Charles and Prince William were both present at a private discussion inside Buckingham Palace during that period. There was no press release. No photographs were released. This was not entirely uncommon within the royal household. Yet the tense atmosphere surrounding those involved suggested that this was far from an ordinary meeting. What made the situation even more surprising was the subject believed to have been discussed during that exchange. According to several reports, the conversation was directly connected to Prince Louie, the youngest son of Prince William and Catherine. At the time, Louis was only 7 years old. For many years, the public had known Louis as the cheerful and playful child who often brought light-hearted moments to royal events. Yet behind those smiles, some sources suggested that the family might have been facing an issue that deeply concerned the palace. The situation became even more puzzling when two important figures within the royal family appeared almost entirely absent from the discussions connected to the matter. Catherine, who is known to be deeply devoted to her children, remained completely silent in the face of circulating rumors. At the same time, Queen Camilla, who often plays a central role in shaping the royal family's communication strategies, also made no public move. It was this silence that raised questions among observers. Some began to wonder whether a deliberate effort to control information had already been set in motion within the palace. And if that were the case, who had made the decision to keep everything behind closed doors? Some royal watchers believe that Camilla could have been the architect behind a strategy of containment, a method the royal household has often used to prevent sensitive matters from spreading into the public domain. Others believe that King Charles might have been aware of the situation many months earlier and chose to handle it quietly in order to protect the image of the family. So who do you think carries the greatest responsibility for this silence? Camilla, with her familiar strategy of information control, or King Charles, who may have known the truth for months? Leave the number 1 in the comments if you suspect Camilla. Or leave number 2 if you believe Charles is the one who truly stood behind the decision. And to understand what led to that closed-door discussion inside Buckingham Palace, we need to go back to the events that happened several months earlier. It was during that earlier period that the first signs of this story began to appear. In any family, the first person to notice small changes in a child is usually the mother. In the case of Prince Louis, several sources who follow the royal household believe that Catherine was the one who first noticed the unusual signs. It was not a dramatic event. There was no accident that immediately drew attention. It was simply a series of very small changes in the boy's daily routine. Louis has long been known as the most energetic of the 3 children of Prince William and Catherine. During public events, he often appears lively, curious, and sometimes mischievous enough to make the entire family laugh. Because of that, when Louis began to grow quieter at certain moments at home, Catherine quickly sensed that something might not be entirely normal. At first, the signs were difficult to notice. According to accounts from individuals who had close contact with the family, Louis would sometimes suddenly fall silent while playing. On several occasions, he would stop in the middle of an activity, place his hand on his side, and appear uncomfortable. It was not severe pain. There were no obvious symptoms that would immediately lead someone to suspect a serious medical condition. But for Catherine, those small details could not be ignored. For many years, Catherine has been known as a mother who is deeply involved in the care and upbringing of her children. Unlike the distant image that once characterized earlier royal generations, she has tried to build a close family environment and carefully observes even the smallest changes in her children. Because of that, when these signs repeated themselves several times within a short period, the instinct of a mother began to warn her that this might not simply be ordinary fatigue in a young child. According to sources close to royal operations, Catherine suggested that Louis should undergo an early medical examination. For her, it was a cautious and reasonable step. Yet within the environment of the royal family, even decisions related to personal health are not always determined solely by the immediate family. Some palace communication advisors were reportedly concerned. They believed that taking a young royal family member for specialized medical examinations could quickly attract the attention of the press. Just a single photograph or a small piece of leaked information could trigger widespread speculation across international media within a matter of hours. Within the royal household, the concept of optics is often mentioned in situations like this. It refers not only to the reality of an event, but also to the way the public perceives it. A royal child undergoing an urgent medical examination could trigger a wave of concern, even if the actual problem might not be serious. According to several royal observers, this factor alone made the decision-making process far more complicated than it would be for an ordinary family. Catherine was believed to have emphasized that an early examination was necessary in order to rule out every possible risk. But palace officials worried that any medical step could easily be interpreted as the beginning of a crisis. What drew particular attention was the period of time between the moment Catherine first noticed the unusual signs and the moment the matter was seriously addressed. According to several sources who follow the internal workings of the royal household, Catherine began to worry after only about 3 weeks, when the symptoms shown by Louie appeared repeatedly. However, discussions within the palace were believed to have continued for much longer. One striking number was later mentioned in several analyses. While Catherine believed that action should be taken almost immediately, some advisors suggested waiting several more months in order to assess the situation and avoid creating unnecessary public alarm. According to those sources, the proposed delay could have reached as long as 4 months. For Catherine, this was believed to be an extremely difficult period. She not only had to watch her son condition day by day, but also had to participate in complicated discussions about how the information should be handled. Those who have closely observed the workings of the royal household say that Catherine rarely shows open disagreement with the palace advisory system. Yet, when the matter involves her children, her position tends to become much clearer. Some royal commentators believe this may have been one of the rare moments when Catherine felt she had to fight harder within the institution itself. Not because of power or public image, but because the instinct of a mother cannot easily accept delays when her child's health may be at risk. In that situation, Prince William was also believed to be caught between 2 powerful pressures. On one side stood the Royal Advisory and Communications System, which has always placed great importance on maintaining a stable public image. On the other side were Catherine growing concerns, as she watched every small change in Louis' behavior. What made the story even more notable was that while Catherine was trying to push for an early medical examination, not every influential figure inside the palace wanted the matter to come into the light too quickly. Some believed that controlling the flow of information was the best way to prevent a wave of speculation that could affect the entire royal family. And it was precisely at the moment when Catherine was said to feel almost as if she were fighting alone to protect her son that another figure within the royal household was believed to be quietly playing a key role in extending that silence. This figure was not someone who frequently appeared in public debates. Yet her influence over how the palace handles communication crises has been mentioned many times in the past. It was at that point that the name Camilla began to surface in private conversations behind the closed doors of the palace. As Catherine's concerns about the health of Prince Louis became more serious, A broader discussion began to form within the royal household. This was no longer simply the story of a mother worried about her son. It quickly became a matter connected to how Buckingham Palace manages sensitive information. And within those private discussions, Queen Camilla was believed to be one of the most influential voices. For many years, Camilla has become a significant figure in the way the royal family manages communication crises, not through public appearances or official statements. Her influence usually operates behind strategic decisions, where communication advisors and senior officials discuss how and when information should be released. According to several sources who follow the internal workings of the palace, when the unusual signs surrounding Louis began to be discussed more seriously, Camilla was believed to have supported a familiar strategy within the palace system. That strategy was containment, which means keeping information under strict control until the palace is ready to present an official narrative. The reason for this approach was not entirely difficult to understand. A health issue involving a young member of the royal family could quickly become a topic closely followed by international media. With just a single leak, hundreds of theories could appear within a matter of hours. For an institution that places stability of image above almost everything else, controlling the story from the beginning has always been considered essential. But in the case of Louis, this strategy created visible tensions within the family itself. According to some royal observers, Camilla and advisors close to her feared that any information related to Louis' health could provoke a strong reaction from the public, not only because Louis is the grandson of the king, but also because he stands within the royal line of succession. Some individuals inside the palace believed that if news about a serious medical issue spread too early, the media could quickly turn it into a crisis narrative. Speculation about the future of the royal family might appear, and that could affect the image of stability that the reign of King Charles has been trying to build. For that reason, according to several sources, a series of private meetings were organized to discuss how the situation should be handled. These meetings were usually attended by senior advisors, palace communication representatives, and several key members of the royal family. Camilla was believed to have taken an active role in those exchanges. During these discussions, one strategy was mentioned repeatedly. It was the idea of extending the time before any information was publicly confirmed. If Louis required medical observation, it could be handled privately. If the press began to ask questions, the palace could provide general explanations. For example, they might say that the boy was suffering from a cold or simply needed rest after the busy schedule of the family. According to sources who followed this situation closely, that approach created a significant period of delay. Some royal commentators later said that Camilla was believed to have participated in or organized at least 5 private meetings related to managing information surrounding the condition of Louis. The main objective of those meetings was to find ways to buy more time before any public decision would be made. That extended period was believed to last as long as 6 months. For the palace communication system, 6 months could be the time needed to prepare every possible scenario. But for those directly within the family, especially Catherine and William, that delay was believed to be extremely difficult to accept. According to several royal observers, Prince William in particular was not satisfied with the way the situation was handled. For many years, he has tried to build the image of a royal generation that is more transparent and closer to the public. Because of that, delaying information about a matter involving his own son could make him feel that the palace system was placing image above the interests of the family. Some sources suggested that during internal discussions, William expressed clear frustration. He believed that examining and confirming the health condition of Louis should be prioritized above all communication considerations. Meanwhile, communication advisors and those who supported the strategy associated with Camilla argued that moving too quickly could cause the palace to lose control of the narrative. These disagreements did not necessarily occur in a loud or public way, but they reflected a larger debate within the British royal household. One side believed that transparency would help build trust with the public. The other side believed that controlling information remained the best way to protect the institution from powerful media storms. During that entire period, the public knew almost nothing about what was happening behind the doors of the palace. The rare public appearances of Louis did not reveal anything clearly unusual, and whenever questions were raised, royal spokespersons usually offered only very general responses. However, strategies of information control rarely last forever. The more people become involved in monitoring and discussing a situation, the greater the risk that information will leak. And in the case of Louis, that moment eventually arrived, because when the official diagnosis began to be confirmed internally, all calculations about timing and communication strategy became far less important. Once the truth began to emerge, the situation was no longer simply a story about controlling information. That was the moment when everything inside the palace began to change completely. After many months of debate within the palace, the medical examination process was finally carried out more seriously. The initial evaluations that had once been seen as cautious steps quickly turned into a series of more specialized tests, and it was at that moment that doctors began to mention a possibility that no one in the royal family wanted to hear. According to several sources, later cited by royal observers, medical experts discovered signs suggesting that Prince Louis might be facing a rare neurological disorder. This is not a common condition in children, and it is often very difficult to detect during the early stages. The first symptoms can be extremely subtle. Sometimes they appear only as brief episodes of pain, small changes in physical coordination, or moments when a child becomes unusually quiet. Because the early signs are often unclear, the diagnostic process for such conditions usually takes a long time. Doctors must observe many different factors before reaching a conclusion. In the case of Louis, what drew particular attention from medical specialists was the combination of pain around the rib area, moments of distraction, and several minor signs related to movement. According to medical experts who have explained rare neurological disorders in children, these types of conditions can affect many different aspects of the body. In some cases, they influence physical coordination. In other cases, they may affect how the brain processes information, making it difficult for a child to concentrate or respond quickly to the surrounding environment. These early findings quickly made the atmosphere inside the palace far heavier. If the suspicions of the doctors were correct, the problem would no longer be simply a temporary condition. It could be an illness that develops over time. According to some royal commentators, it was precisely that possibility of progression that made internal discussions more tense than ever before. Because within the context of a royal family, the health of a child is not only a personal matter, it also touches on larger questions about the future and the role of members within the line of succession. One of the next steps that doctors were believed to have proposed was to examine possible genetic factors. This led to a series of discussions about the medical history of both sides of the family. During those conversations, the name Spencer was also mentioned. The Spencer family, the lineage of Princess Diana, has long been an important part of the story of the modern royal household. According to several sources who followed the discussions, medical experts reviewed genetic records across multiple generations of the family in order to rule out the possibility that the condition might originate from a rare hereditary factor. This is a standard procedure in many cases of neurological disorders, especially when symptoms appear at a very early age. But alongside the medical evaluations, another debate also began to emerge within the royal household. If the condition of Louis truly proved to be a long-term progressive illness, how might that affect his position within the line of succession? Under current rules, Louis stands behind Prince George and Princess Charlotte in the line to the throne. This means that under normal circumstances, the likelihood of him becoming king is extremely small. However, a position within the line of succession still carries significant symbolic meaning within the structure of the monarchy. Some royal observers suggested that the question raised in private discussions was not whether Louis could one day become king. The larger question was whether a member who might face serious medical difficulties in the future should continue to hold an official position in the line of succession. Debates of this kind are almost never made public. But in institutions as old as the British monarchy, matters related to the ability to carry out royal duties are always considered with great caution. While these complex discussions were taking place at higher levels, another aspect of the story unfolded within the closer circle of the family. According to several sources close to the household, Louis began to notice that something unusual was happening around him. There were more visits to doctors, more serious conversations among adults, and a sense of worry that children can sometimes feel even when nothing is clearly explained to them. One detail that many commentators later repeated was a question that Louis was believed to have asked during a conversation with his parents. It was a very simple question, yet it made the adults around him think for a long time. He asked whether he was still a prince. That question reflected a very difficult reality for any family. When a child begins to realize that a health condition might change many things, questions about identity and place within the family often appear very early. According to several medical experts who have studied similar cases, rare neurological disorders can progress slowly over many years before clear symptoms appear. In some situations, the early signs are very mild and only become more noticeable when a child enters adolescence. One figure that reportedly caused particular concern within the palace emerged during medical discussions. According to the initial assessment of doctors, if this truly was a progressive neurological disorder, around 70 to 80% of the symptoms could become more visible when Louis reaches the age of 18. This would mean that in the worst-case scenario, he might require medical support and long-term care in the future. Information like this does not only raise questions about the health of a child, it also forces the entire structure of the royal household to confront a difficult reality. And for Prince William, who has always tried to protect his family from the pressure of the royal system, this moment became a breaking point. Because faced with the information presented by doctors, continuing to remain silent no longer seemed like a choice that could be extended much longer. When the initial medical evaluations regarding the condition of Prince Louis began to be presented more clearly in internal meetings, pressure inside the royal family started to concentrate on one person more than anyone else. That person was Prince William. As the father of Louis and also the direct heir to the throne, William stood at the intersection of the two greatest responsibilities in his life. On one side was duty to the monarchy, on the other side was his own family. According to many royal observers, William had already been unhappy with the way the palace delayed information during the previous months, but when more serious medical conclusions began to appear, that frustration was believed to have turned into a firmer position. He no longer saw this as a matter of communication management. For him, the issue had become honesty and the priority given to family. One detail that attracted attention in several reports was that William began asking questions about when King Charles had actually learned about the medical suspicions surrounding Louis. Within the royal system, important information is usually reported to the monarch quite early, especially matters involving members of the line of succession. According to some commentators, William gradually realized that the medical discussions may have been presented to Charles before he himself had been fully informed. That does not necessarily mean that the king intentionally concealed information, but within the complex system of the palace, advisors sharing information according to levels of hierarchy is not unusual. However, for William, even that possibility was enough to make him raise very direct questions. According to several sources who followed internal developments at the time, William requested a frank conversation with his father at Buckingham Palace. That exchange was described as one of the most tense conversations between the two generations of the royal family since Charles became king. Those familiar with William's approach say that he usually avoids direct confrontations within the family. But this time his position was believed to be very clear. If the palace continued to delay action regarding the condition of Louis simply to protect the image of the monarchy, he would not accept it. According to several sources, later cited by royal journalists, William spoke very directly and said that his priority was not the throne. His priority was his family. This is a position he has mentioned many times in previous interviews. But in this situation, the meaning of those words became far more powerful. During the conversation with Charles, William was believed to have referred to the memory of his mother, Princess Diana. For many years he has said that one of the most important lessons he learned from Diana's life was that family should never be sacrificed for the pressures of the royal system. According to several commentators, that memory has made William particularly sensitive to situations in which he feels the palace is placing image above people. And when the story involved his own son, he did not want to repeat what his mother once experienced. One of the most striking details that later appeared in behind-the-scenes discussions was that William mentioned the possibility of giving up his own position in the line of succession if it ever became necessary. This would be an extremely serious statement in the context of the British royal family. By tradition, voluntarily giving up a position in the line of succession has almost never happened in modern times. The most famous example often mentioned is when King Edward VIII abdicated in the year 1936 in order to marry Wallis Simpson, but even that event created a major constitutional crisis. For that reason, when information appeared suggesting that William had seriously discussed the possibility of changing his position in the line of succession, many observers saw it as a sign that the level of tension inside the family had reached a very high point. Another figure mentioned by several royal journalists later made the story even more remarkable. According to some sources, William was believed to have exchanged private letters with 3 members of Parliament at Westminster in order to discuss possible constitutional scenarios if he ever decided to step away from the line of succession in the future. If this information is accurate, it would represent an unprecedented step in more than 300 years of British royal history. Matters related to the succession to the throne are usually handled entirely within the royal family and the government. For a direct heir to actively explore the possibility of changing his own position would be something almost never seen before. According to constitutional analysts, conversations like these do not necessarily mean that William was preparing to leave the royal family, but they do show that he wanted to understand every possible option before making any decision that could affect his family. In that situation, King Charles was believed to have found himself in a very difficult position. As king, he must consider the stability of the monarchy. But as a father and a grandfather, he also understands that William was reacting from genuine concern for his son. Some sources close to the palace said that the conversation between father and son ended in a heavy atmosphere. Charles was believed to have spent a long time afterward thinking about how to balance the responsibility of a king with the feelings of a father. People who have worked with Charles for many years say that he has always been very sensitive to matters involving family. And in this situation, the pressure from both sides may have made the moment particularly difficult for him. But just as the tense dialogue between 2 generations of the royal family seemed to reach its peak, another factor suddenly appeared. Another member of the family, someone long known for honesty and discipline, began to intervene in the story. That person was Princess Anne. As tension inside the royal family began to spread after the arguments between Prince William and King Charles, another figure quietly began reviewing the entire story from a different perspective. That person was Princess Anne. For decades, Anne has been regarded as the most disciplined and practical member of the Windsor family. She rarely takes part in public controversies, but she is known for carefully reviewing internal records before reaching any conclusion. According to several sources who follow royal affairs, it was Anne who requested to review the full records related to the initial medical examinations of Prince Louie. These documents included not only doctors' reports but also administrative notes showing when information was transferred to each level within the palace system. What attracted Anne's attention was not the medical content itself, but the timeline of the reports. In large institutions, such as the British royal household, every important document is marked with the time it is received and approved. When Anne examined these records closely, she was believed to have discovered a detail that made the entire story far more complicated. One of the initial reports about neurological signs related to Louis had been sent to higher levels much earlier than the moment when William and Catherine were fully informed. According to several sources later mentioned by royal journalists, the file had even been marked with a special status. Access to the document had been locked at a high security level within the internal archive system. This meant that only a very small number of people inside the palace had permission to see the full content of the report. Even more notable was the timing of that decision. The file had been locked under an internal directive around 6 months before the deeper medical examinations officially began. For people familiar with how the palace operates, this detail suggested a clear possibility. Early information about the condition of Louis may have been reported to the king much earlier than expected. If that was correct, King Charles may have known about the medical suspicions even before the parents of Louis were fully informed. This was the detail that Princess Anne was believed to find particularly important, because it did not involve only medical decisions. It also involved the way information was controlled inside the family. According to some sources close to the family, after reviewing the records, Anne sought a private conversation with Catherine. The discussion was never officially confirmed, but many observers believe it became a crucial moment in the entire story. During that exchange, Anne was believed to acknowledge that Catherine's original instinct about the need for earlier medical examinations may have been completely correct. One sentence repeated many times in later analysis was believed to come from that conversation. Anne reportedly told Catherine that she had been right from the beginning. If the documents reviewed by Anne truly reflected the sequence of events, then the delay may not have been only a temporary decision to manage communication. It could have been part of a longer strategy lasting many months in order to avoid triggering a strong public reaction. But information control systems like this rarely last forever. As more people within the family began questioning the missing timelines, pressure on the palace increased rapidly. And once the truth started moving beyond the sealed walls of the palace, the story was no longer just a private matter for the Windsor family. The entire nation began paying attention. When the first reports suggesting that the palace may have delayed responding to Prince Louis' health condition began appearing in media discussions, the public reaction moved much faster than royal advisors had anticipated. For many years, internal matters of the Windsor family had usually been managed quite effectively through official statements and carefully designed communication strategies. But this time, the story involved a child who was only 7 years old, and public opinion responded in a very different way. At first, posts appearing on social media mainly questioned the delay in confirming medical information. However, within a short time, these discussions began spreading across many different platforms. One phrase quickly became the center of online debate: the hashtag Justice for Louis. Many people argued that if early reports had already existed beforehand, the boy's family should have been fully informed much earlier in order to make timely medical decisions. According to media data analysis companies, the scale of this wave of discussion was far larger than most royal controversies in recent years. Within the first 72 hours after the story began spreading, more than 2 million posts across social media platforms directly mentioned concerns about transparency in how the palace handled information. Many observers described it as the largest public reaction involving the monarchy since the public disputes that followed the death of Princess Diana. Public attention did not stop at online discussions. In the following days, several civil groups began organizing peaceful gatherings near Westminster and outside Buckingham Palace. These gatherings were not large-scale demonstrations in the traditional sense, but they continued for 5 consecutive nights and attracted significant attention from international media. Most participants were asking for something quite simple: They wanted to know whether information about Prince Louis' condition had truly been delayed within the palace. Some people carried signs asking the royal family to be more transparent whenever issues involving children's health and rights appeared within the system. Public pressure quickly spread into the political sphere as well. In the British Parliament, several members of Parliament began raising questions about the level of transparency within internal royal mechanisms, particularly when those decisions could affect individuals within the line of succession. A few short discussions were introduced during parliamentary sessions about whether regulations related to medical information and the privacy of royal family members might need to be updated in a modern context. Constitutional experts emphasized that these discussions did not mean that Parliament was directly interfering in the private lives of the royal family. However, the fact that the story had rapidly become a political subject showed that public concern had already moved far beyond the boundaries of a family matter. In that environment, advisors inside Buckingham Palace began realizing that the traditional strategy of silence, which had often been used during sensitive situations, might no longer be effective. With every passing hour, the number of articles, comments, and analyses continued increasing, along with wider speculation, pressure from public opinion. Media coverage and parliamentary discussions created a situation the palace could no longer easily avoid. Eventually, all attention began focusing on a single person who could make the next decision: King Charles. Under growing pressure from the public, the media, and even internal family debates, King Charles was finally forced to deliver an official response. For several days before that moment, advisors at Buckingham Palace had been considering different communication strategies. However, once the story had become a national conversation across Britain, the only remaining option was to announce a clear and constructive step forward. The statement released by the palace emphasized two important points. First, the royal family confirmed that Prince Louis would retain his title and his position within the family. There were no plans to change the boy's status in any way. Second, King Charles announced the creation of a new initiative called the Prince Louis Foundation. It was described as a support fund for families with children suffering from chronic illnesses or rare neurological disorders. According to the initial announcement, the foundation would focus on three main areas. The first area was financial support for medical research programs aimed at improving early diagnosis of neurological conditions in children. The second area was helping families gain better access to long-term care services, which are often extremely expensive and complex. The third area was raising public awareness about the challenges families face when caring for children with chronic conditions. One detail that drew considerable attention was the expected scale of the program. According to the plan released alongside the statement, the Prince Louis Foundation aims to support more than 10,000 children living with chronic illnesses during its first 5 years of operation. If this target is achieved, it would become one of the largest charitable initiatives ever launched directly in connection with a young member of the royal family. For many observers, the decision carried not only humanitarian meaning, but also represented an attempt to close a tense chapter. Instead of continuing to debate what may have happened behind palace doors, the royal family appeared to be shifting the focus toward helping families facing similar situations. A few days after the statement was released, key members of the royal family appeared together at a public event. William, Catherine and their children stood beside King Charles on the palace balcony in a rare moment that suggested unity after several weeks of intense pressure. For the public, that image carried a clear message. Despite the controversy and the doubts that had surfaced, the Windsor family was trying to move forward, and within this difficult story, hope still had a place. The story you have just heard is not simply an internal dispute within the Windsor family. It raises a larger question about how the monarchy handles truth, responsibility, and public trust in an age of transparency. What happened with Prince Louis may become a turning point that forces the palace to change the way it confronts crisis. But whether that change will truly happen is something many people are still watching closely. If this video made you think, please like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next analysis. And leave a comment below. Do you believe the royal family will truly change after this scandal? See you in the next video. At Buckingham Palace, where every detail is meant to be perfectly orchestrated, a statue that was supposed to be purely symbolic has instead plunged the royal family into turmoil. A secret statue of Queen Camilla, erected without King Charles's official approval, has ignited a storm within palace walls. And when the news broke, the king reportedly lost his composure. He immediately summoned an emergency meeting not just to demand who allowed this to happen, but to confront a far more unsettling question. What exactly is Camilla plotting? According to multiple palace insiders, the statue was placed in a sensitive location within the palace grounds, a spot once reserved for the late Queen Elizabeth II's memorial. Camilla's decision to claim that sacred space for herself has enraged several senior royals. The public, too, has begun to wonder, was this an innocent oversight, or a calculated move to assert dominance from a woman long regarded as the intruder in Britain's most tragic love story? Ironically, while the royal family struggles to rebuild its image amid scandals and the king's health concerns, Camilla seems to have stirred chaos once again. As some observers wryly note, true power doesn't need to be carved in stone yet for Camilla. Perhaps even a statue isn't enough. And so, this late-night royal summit may not simply be about quelling a palace embarrassment, but about confronting a deeper truth. Is the crown itself being manipulated from within Buckingham Palace? At dawn, the United Kingdom awoke to disbelief. Before the gates of Buckingham Palace stood not Elizabeth, not Diana, not even Charles, but Camilla. Inside the palace, witnesses say Charles dropped his teacup in shock upon seeing the image. Was Camilla driven by sudden envy? Or was this a meticulously calculated bid to usurp England's most sacred symbols? Now the question remains. Faced with such defiance, will Charles stay silent, or will he make history by delivering the most dramatic exile since the reign of Elizabeth II? On the morning of October 9th, L'Ancien Archevaux, Britain awoke to a shock unlike any in its modern history. As the first slivers of sunlight broke through London's fog, guards stationed at Buckingham Palace were met with an astonishing sight. In the very center of the royal courtyard stood a massive bronze statue of Queen Camilla that had appeared overnight. No one knew who authorized it. No one had witnessed trucks, crânes, or any sign of installation. Yet there it stood, bold and immovable, as though it had always belonged there, defying both tradition and time itself. Within minutes, the news exploded across the nation. Reporters rushed to the palace gates. Cameras and microphones pressed against the black iron fences, where the golden royal crest gleamed faintly through the mist against the gray morning sky. Camilla's bronze likeness gleamed with an eerie brilliance, both regal and unsettling. This was no gentle or benevolent portrait. Her expression was austere, chin raised high, lips tightened, eyes fixed directly on Buckingham's front gates, a sight historically reserved for statues of late monarchs. Crowds quickly gathered. People pointed, murmured, filmed, and shared their disbelief online. A statue of Camilla in front of Buckingham. What's happening? Was this ordered by the king, or did she do it herself? Within an hour, every major outlet, from BBC to Sky News, Daily Mail to The Guardian, was broadcasting the same image. Camilla in bronze, towering and unyielding. Her posture, that of a queen ushering in a new age. Headlines dominated the airwaves. The new face of the monarchy. Camilla's statue stuns Britain. Has the queen consort declared her own legacy? Reporters frantically sought confirmation from the Royal Communications Office. But every call met the same response: no comment. A palace spokesperson was spotted leaving home with a grim expression, refusing to answer questions. That silence, instead of easing the public, only stoked more intrigue. A Sky News correspondent reported live. For over a century, no statue has ever been placed before Buckingham without royal council approval. The mystery is who authorized this, and why Camilla. The crowd outside thickened. Some placed flowers at the statue's base, paying homage as though to a reigning monarch. Others quietly set photos of Princess Diana beside the pedestal, their handwritten notes reading, "You can't replace her." The atmosphere turned electric. Elderly onlookers stood in solemn disbelief, while younger ones filmed TikToks set to dramatic music. By mid-morning, statue of Camilla had surged to the top of national trends. Political analysts flooded talk shows. One commentator asserted, "This is a deliberate display of dominance. A statue in front of Buckingham isn't decoration. It's a declaration of power." Another countered, "If this was done without the king's consent, it's a desecration of royal sanctity, a direct insult to the monarchy's legacy." All eyes shifted toward the palace. But King Charles remained unseen. No statements, no appearances, no reaction from behind Buckingham's imposing walls. Television cameras lingered, waiting for any sign. A face at a window. A royal figure stepping into view. Nothing. By noon, anchors began to voice the questions echoing nationwide. Why hasn't Charles appeared? Where is the king? Could this be part of a new royal rebranding campaign? Inside the BBC newsroom, the editor-in-chief gave a clear directive: push the Camilla story to the top. Lead with the question, why her and why now? The midday broadcast began with the anchor's grave tone. This morning, the nation was left astounded as a statue of Queen Camilla was found standing before Buckingham Palace. The palace has issued no comment while speculation mounts. Was this a sanctioned effort to reshape the monarchy's image, or an act of overreach by the Queen Consort herself? Slow-motion footage followed, Camilla's bronze hand resting on her dress hem, her metallic eyes gleaming as if alive, her posture commanding and assertive. The host remarked, "That gaze isn't humble. It's the gaze of someone declaring, 'I am here, and I will not be erased.'" Meanwhile, in Westminster cafes, conversations buzzed. Some called it a modern PR maneuver to rejuvenate the royal brand post-Elizabeth II. Others dismissed it as a sign of unchecked ambition. An elderly woman clutching a newspaper told a reporter, "If Diana were still here, she'd laugh bitterly." Camilla lived in her shadow for decades, and now she wants a statue to prove herself. But power can't be sculpted in bronze. As the day advanced, debate intensified. Women's organizations voiced cautious praise, calling the statue a progressive moment for living female icons. Outside the palace, crowds surged. One group chanted, "Diana forever." Another replied, "Long live Queen Camilla." The confrontation escalated into minor unrest, prompting police to erect barriers. Above them, drones hovered, capturing aerial shots of the swelling crowd and the lone bronze figure. Camilla's statue gleaming like a beacon, both magnificent and menacing. Inside Buckingham, curtains stayed drawn. A palace insider leaked anonymously to the press that no member of the royal family was informed in advance and that some are furious. No official confirmation followed. By evening, the BBC's closing line sent chills through viewers. The palace remains silent. No statement, no clarification, and within that silence, the nation hears the echo of metal striking at royal dignity. Night descended. Floodlights illuminated the statue. Camilla's bronze figure shimmered under the beams, her eyes fixed eternally on Buckingham's gates as ribbons fluttered in the wind. No one knew who had built it, No one dared order its removal. Only the crowd remained, staring at the cold, commanding face of the woman who had shaken an empire. And inside the palace, behind its gilded silence, not a single word was spoken. That stillness spread across Britain like a gathering storm, heralding the first tremor of a looming political and media upheaval. People across Britain began to question the impossible. Why had a statue of Camilla been placed in the royal square? A space long reserved for the deceased monarchs of history. Who had approved such a thing? Who carried out the installation? And how could a monument of that size rise overnight without anyone noticing? These questions ignited a stunning investigation that would dominate headlines for days. Even in a nation well-versed in royal scandals, this story felt surreal. A statue of Queen Camilla appearing from nowhere, occupying sacred ground before Buckingham Palace and throwing the country into turmoil. By the third morning after the statue's unveiling, inside a cramped office at The Guardian, a young journalist named Eleanor Shaw sat before her computer. Her screen filled with photos of the bronze monument from every possible angle. Her desk was buried beneath notes, architectural diagrams, and an old map of Buckingham Square's layout taken from public archives. They couldn't have built that without official clearance. She muttered to her editor, the older man beside her, sleeves rolled up and coffee in hand, gave a skeptical snort. Not for ordinary folks. No. But this is Camilla we're talking about. She's crossed every boundary before. Start by finding out who made it. Eleanor got to work, combing through records of art commissions signed over the past 3 months. She emailed the Royal Cultural Council, contacted the London Sculptors Association, and even reviewed customs data for art shipments entering Britain in recent weeks. By that afternoon, a peculiar lead surfaced. A shipping container labeled Royal Heritage Sculpture had arrived at the port of Dover 2 weeks earlier, sent by a small art firm based in Paris. The listed lead artist, Henri Duval. Eleanor froze. The name rang a bell. Duval had once been profiled in Le Monde des Arts, described as the sculptor who shapes the soul of power. 3 years prior, he had worked on state-commissioned monuments for the French government, memorializing renowned female writers. Now somehow his name was entangled in this extraordinary royal scandal. 2 days later, Eleanor boarded the Eurostar to Paris. Rain streaked the train windows as she clutched her notes. The address she'd traced led to a narrow lane in Montmartre, an aging sculpture studio dusted white with plaster residue, the air faintly sweet with the scent of casting wax. After 3 soft knocks, the door creaked open. Standing there was a tall, lean man with chestnut hair brushing his collar, his hands stained with bronze dust. His expression was weary, his eyes wary. "You're the British journalist?" he asked in halting English, his French accent thick. "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly. "I only need to know one thing. The Camilla statue, you were the sculptor, weren't you?" For a long moment, Henri said nothing. Then he gave a quiet nod. That small gesture felt like an explosion in the still air. Eleanor flipped open her notebook, but Henri raised a hand to stop her. "No recordings," he said firmly. "You listen. I talk." He pulled out a chair, sat, and stared into the distance as if recalling a dream. "She approached me about 6 months ago," he began. "At the time, I was working on a commission in Marseille. One of her assistants called, saying the royals wanted a statue to honor the values of women in the dynasty. I believed it was an official project, so I agreed to meet." He described how Camilla herself arrived in Paris without ceremony, without photographers or guards in uniform. She came accompanied only by an elderly secretary and a plain-clothed bodyguard. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe not far from Henri's studio. She wasn't at all like how the media portrays her. Henri began softly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but her eyes were cold, deep, and calculating. She didn't speak of art. She spoke of remembrance. Remembrance? Eleanor asked. Raising an eyebrow, Henri nodded slowly. She told me, people always remember the dead, but I want them to see the living. That line sent a chill through Eleanor. Henri took a long drag from his cigarette before continuing. She didn't commission a statue. She commissioned a manifesto. According to Henri, Camilla wanted a face devoid of emotion, no smile. No tears meant to embody the strength of a woman who doesn't need love to exist. When Henri suggested such an expression might alienate the public, Camilla had simply smiled. Sometimes, she told him, to be respected, you must make the world fear you. Eleanor asked quietly, did she say why she wanted it placed in front of Buckingham? Henri hesitated, then said, yes. She said, that's where the world looks when it looks at the royals. And if it stood there, she'd never be forgotten. Her words were, when people think of the Queen, I want them to think of me and no one else. He explained that the project's execution was planned with near-military precision. Camilla had personally arranged for a private construction company to handle the work using the guise of a square renovation project. Temporarily approved by the Royal Cultural Council, where she happened to serve as honorary patron, all documents bore authentic seals. No one dared to question them. Laborers were recruited in secret and worked exclusively at night under strict non-disclosure agreements. I remember the final night. Henri said quietly, when the casting was done, she came to the studio alone. She stood before the statue for almost an hour, saying nothing. When I asked if she was happy with it, she answered, I've waited my entire life for the world to look up to me. He turned to the rain-streaked window. I don't think she's insane, he murmured. She's consumed by the need to exist in history. In a dynasty where every woman before her was buried beneath a man's name, Eleanor remained motionless. Turning a page in her notebook, she realized she had just heard the most crucial revelation of the entire affair. Can I quote her exactly? She asked carefully. Henri pursed his lips, then nodded. Yes, but write it truthfully, he said. When history only remembers dead women, I'll make it remember the living one. The words echoed through the room like a prophecy. Eleanor felt her heart pound. She knew that sentence alone could ignite a storm. 2 days later, her article appeared on the front page of The Guardian under the headline, The Woman Who Forced History to Look at Her. The story cited an anonymous French sculptor who worked directly with Queen Camilla, detailing their entire conversation. The article's closing, quote, Camilla's haunting line set Britain ablaze once more. That evening, television networks across the country carried the news. The BBC opened its broadcast with the anchor's steady voice. Sources have confirmed that the Camilla statue was created by French sculptor Henri Duval under a confidential commission from the Queen herself. Duval revealed that the Queen viewed the statue as a manifesto for a new dynasty. Buckingham Palace continues to withhold comment. Social media erupted. One faction condemned her. She's gone too far. This isn't art. It's self-worship. Others praised her defiance. She's fearless. History belongs to those who refuse to be forgotten. Historians soon joined the debate. On ITV, a royal symbolism expert remarked, from Queen Victoria to Elizabeth II, no monarch has ever erected their own statue while alive. If this truly was Camilla's decision, it's not merely vanity. It's an act of rebellion within the very heart of the monarchy. That night in Paris, Henri Duval's phone rang relentlessly. Reporters, producers, even palace officials urging him to stay silent. He ignored every call. Watching the news, he saw the statue under the golden evening lights and whispered to himself, she got what she wanted. She made the world look up. In London, Eleanor sat alone in the newsroom, eyes fixed on the live broadcast. Before Buckingham Palace, crowds had gathered once more. An elderly woman lifted a sign. We remember Diana. Another group waved banners. Camilla's era begins. Two visions of Britain, two icons, collided under the same night sky. As cameras flashed and chants echoed, the bronze Camilla stood unmoving, her face blank, eyes fixed eternally on the palace gates. Eleanor closed her laptop and gazed out the window. In that moment, she realized this story had transcended journalism. It had become a new royal tragedy, one born from the hunger to be immortalized and the terror of being erased. And somewhere within Buckingham's silent halls, perhaps Camilla was smiling. The smile of a woman convinced she had carved her name into eternity, no matter the price. From Henri Duval's testimony, the British public slowly began to piece together the truth buried beneath the bronze figure that had shaken the kingdom. It wasn't simply a work of art. It was the visible outcome of a silent war inside the royal household. A war between memory and envy. Between love and dominion, a struggle between a man chained to the past and a woman determined not to vanish from history. Only days before the statue appeared, Charles and Camilla had clashed bitterly in the study at Clarence House. On the desk lay a thick folder stamped Confidential Royal Memorial Project. It contained detailed plans for a memorial to Princess Diana, personally approved by the king. The concept proposed a serene rose garden encircling a plaque that read, "In memory of the light that never fades, a place of quiet reflection, pure and dignified." But for Camilla, that project struck at the core of her pride. When she entered and caught sight of the sketches, her composed expression hardened. She picked up the file, scanned a few pages, and slammed it shut. "You still can't let her go. Can you?" "Charles," she said, her voice trembling with rage. 30 years, and she's still stronger than I'll ever be in your heart." Gone was the polished tone of the queen consort. What emerged was the raw voice of a woman long suppressed by resentment. Charles looked up, fatigue shadowing his eyes. "This isn't about emotions," he said quietly. "It's a king's duty. Diana represents compassion. The nation needs a place to remember that." Camilla's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "And what about me? I've endured the world's scorn, the headlines, the humiliation, and I've stayed by your side. Don't I deserve recognition? Or at least respect?" Charles turned slightly away, his tone dropping. "You already have everything. Camilla, don't ask that history belonged to you as well." Those words detonated like a silent bomb. Camilla straightened, her voice turning cold as glass. "You want the world to honor the woman who haunted you all your life? Fine. Then I'll make sure they remember me. Two in bronze, in stone, in a vision they'll never erase." Before he could answer, she stormed out. The door slammed behind her, leaving a fragile teacup trembling on the desk and an unnatural stillness in the air. That very night, Camilla placed 2 discreet calls to her closest allies on the Royal Cultural Council. Her tone was measured, unwavering. "We're launching the Women's Legacy in the Monarchy project. The inauguration happens tomorrow." The officials on the line were dumbfounded. But within an hour, a packet of impeccably prepared documents arrived, complete with official seals and valid signatures. Everything appeared legitimate, airtight. Camilla had planned it all in advance, waiting for the precise moment Charles uttered Diana's name to pull the trigger. Using her patronage status on the council, she ordered the Buckingham Palace forecourt sealed, citing preparations for a ceremony honoring modern royal women. It was a perfect bureaucratic cover. No guard dared object. Under the pretense of cultural site upgrades, she signed an emergency contract with a private construction firm. Workers were hired under confidentiality clauses, told only to assemble large wooden crates marked Royal Heritage Project, according to sealed blueprints. None of them knew what they were building. That night, London lay shrouded in fog. From within the mist came the clang of hammers and the hiss of welding torches. Like some clandestine ritual, Camilla appeared around 2 inches the morning, wrapped in a dark coat, silently supervising every movement. When the final bolts were fastened, she stepped forward, lifted her gaze toward her own bronze likeness, eyes hard, posture regal, and whispered, "From this moment on, no one will erase me from history." By dawn, the guards arriving for their shift froze in disbelief.